everyone, welcome. I'm super excited to have you all here today. I'm Irina Chismash, Head of Marketing at Castify, and I'll be your host for this session. Today, we are talking about something every CS team has faced, but not everyone likes it to admit, and this is customer escalations. They aren't rare. They are actually part of the job, and sooner or later, we all end up in the middle of one. So, in the next hour, we'll walk through 6 real escalation scenarios. The kind where you need to act fast, get the right people involved, say the right thing, and still walk away with the relationship intact. I'm not going to tell you how to do that. Matt Woodward and Miles Goldstein will. They've been through it. They will break it down. They'll let us know what they did, why they did it, and what they would do differently. Matt, Miles, thank you for accepting my invite and for joining us today.
Thank you.
Pleasure to be here.
Before we dive into the topic of today, I want to address a quick word on Castify, and then we'll continue. At Castify, we help CS teams stay on top of the accounts before they hit red. That means better visibility, early signals, and fewer surprises. Yeah, escalations still happen, but you catch them earlier. You come in more prepared, and you are not scrambling last minute. That's also why we are hosting this session, because even with all the right tools, the hard part is still knowing how to react when things go sideways. A few housekeeping rules. This session is being recorded, so you'll get the replay. And if you have questions, drop them in the chat or in the dedicated Q&A tab. We'll try to take them as we go, if they make sense in the context of the conversation. If not, we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end. And now I suggest let's jump in. And we start with the first situation, a situation that I'm sure most of you have seen it. We have an open ticket. The customer's waiting. Time keeps passing and nothing's moving. You are chasing updates on your side while trying to keep the customer calm, and the pressure is building. Miles, how do you usually go about this?
Well, for me, communication is the key. You've got to get frequent updates to the customer. You've got to make sure they understand what you're doing on their behalf, and you've got to be pulling updates from everyone else. I've been fortunate in that several of my companies, I've had very good relationships with engineering, with customer success. Everyone has to be talking. The customer has to be getting real-time information. You've got to set realistic expectations and then meet your status frequency commitments. So if I tell you I'm going to tell you in an hour whether engineering's got to fix, you've got to meet that commitment. And from the engineering side, I don't like just escalating. You don't just call a VP or director and toss the ball. No, you've got to work closely with whomever is assigned. So support, success, engineering, they all have to be together and keep that communication loop going with the customer.
So you mentioned that you aren't basically jumping in directly, but do you have a structure to push things forward?
Yeah, with the engineering teams, I usually set up escalation procedures, which, depending whether you're frontline, backline, there's steps you have to do. So with one of my frontline organizations, we had 800 wiki documents saying for this situation, here's what to collect, here's what to ask for, so that we don't just send it's broken to engineering. You send it's broken to engineering, it sits there for 3 weeks, it comes back with what's broken. And you don't have logs, you don't have reproducible test cases. So you've got to prepare your front line with that. With these organizations, typically my backline, my level 2 or level 3, know to collect that. So if I've got a level 3 person escalating to engineering, they've got that working relationship, that credibility, and they've done their homework. But you don't want to waste engineering's time because that wastes the customer's time.
And on the customer side of things, how do you balance being transparent without making things worse?
I missed the first part of it. How do you do 24/7?
How do you balance, so on the customer side, because, okay, there's a lot of work internally to solve the things, but on the other thing, you also have to, okay, be transparent with the customer. How do you balance this?
It comes down to just, for me, it's being truthful. Long ago, I had an altercation with a sales lead because he wanted me to give misinformation to the customer. I figured that credibility is my coin. If I don't have credibility, I should take a walk. So I'd rather tell a customer honest, bad news with expectations. This is what's happening, but here's where we're going, rather than lying. Don't keep saying the fix is an hour away, the fix is an hour away, the fix is an hour away. If the fix isn't coming until Tuesday, tell the customer that. And then each day give them the status, we're still on track for Tuesday. Here's what's happening. Here's what we're testing. Here's the theories. And sometimes the theory you're testing today proves wrong, and you do a different theory for tomorrow. And that's not knowing where you're going. That's a scientific approach. And if you tell the customer this, most of my customers have been mature enough to accept that kind of information.
Do you think in some cases we are afraid to tell the customer that the resolution, to communicate the right resolution to them, because we do not know how to manage their expectations?
Exactly. Some people, again, would rather keep the customer, quote, happy by saying, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming, which, by the third time you say that, the customer's not happy. They're escalating. They're calling everyone whose number they've got with a title, right? I'd rather head that off. I'd rather, again, tell them what's going on. And even, if you feel the need to escalate, here's the 3 VPs that can make this thing happen faster, but it takes 9 months to have a baby. They've got to eliminate possibilities. They've got to design the fix. They've got to test the fix. I'm not sending you something that's going to make matters worse. And as long as we have that communication, that's also where the trust between support, success, engineering comes into play, is that they know that you're managing the situation, not setting them up for failure, right? If they're telling me next week and I'm telling the customer tomorrow, nobody's happy.
I like, thanks, Corey. He sent us a message on chat, and he said that in their case, they use 3 different Slack channels. One is for low escalations, reviewed once a week. One for medium, should be reviewed within a day. And one for urgent matters to be looked at ASAP. What do you think about this flow, about this procedure? Handling, we're sorting down the type of escalations into 3 different Slack channels.
So my last team was actually my last couple of teams have been very Slack dependent. So it's a wonderful tool. And that way you can document the conversations. You can go back and read it. You can identify people, and that will send them notifications to their screens. I've had Slack channels directly with the customer where we can share information. I've had internal Slack channels as you've suggested, with engineering and with success. Those are great places to have open conversations. You don't need to have a bridge line like we did back in the dark ages, where if you're not on the phone, you don't get the statuses. They have to be used appropriately. I mean, everyone knows the boy who cried wolf. You don't want to just keep throwing stuff into the hot channel if it's not hot. If you've got a question for what does this mean, what do I need to do, you do that in your team channel. You don't bring in the VP engineering or whatever. But those work really well if people have the maturity to use them correctly. You don't just throw stuff in there, throw the right stuff in there.
All right. Speaking of that VP of the engineering, that basically brings me to the second scenario that I wanna tackle. And the second one is, you've been working with a customer for a while. There's been some friction. Maybe something didn't get fixed fast enough. Maybe expectations weren't aligned. And at some point, you get that message. Can I speak to your manager? Matt, what's your move when a customer asks to go above your head?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think naturally, CSMs or anyone that gets that, their first reaction can be, oh no, right? So I'll talk a bit later about removing the oh no from that moment. because that's the first unhelpful thing that happens, but it's so ubiquitous. These cases, I think, are, as you mentioned, Irina, you may have just had to tell them no on something that they wanted. Maybe you found some unclear expectations, or there was some expectations set before you got them, for implementations. We've all been there. I think this, it's like a misdeliverable. These are often sort of the types of cases where this comes up. The first thing to do is to accept immediately. Absolutely, yes. If you do anything other than that, everything else becomes adversarial. And that's the last thing that you want. So it's, an immediate, full-throated absolutely. But not a hot potato. So, you got to swallow your pride. Escalations are healthy. I bug my team when I don't get escalations as much as I do, when we do get them. Everything's perfect, So, it's a healthy, natural, important part of what that job is, what our role is, and why there's a leadership structure in the first place. So no problem. Swallow that pride. But instead of, absolutely doing that quickly, which is easy to do and very simple to do, especially if the emotional state of the conversation is a heated one. Best case scenario, a CSM then interrogates what's going on very deeply, because the quality of the engagement with leadership, with the manager, depends very, very much on the research and your understanding about what exactly the nature of the challenge and problem is. So yes, immediately, do you have 5 minutes for me to ask you a bunch of questions about exactly where we're at, so that I can make sure to hand this over really well before we engage? Yes, it'll always be a yes. 99.9% of the time. I think when this happens, in my personal experience, 90% of the time, they just need to hear the same thing you told them from somebody else. Usually it's about that simple. This is not how our product works. This is not a use case we currently support. This is the use case we're designed, for example. Here's how we've seen this circumstance be managed with other successful clients. If all of that happens and then it's a no, oftentimes 90% or so, they just need someone with a higher level of authority to say the same things to them and accept it. The other 20% of the times it's a part of feeling heard, or possibly just expressing. But of course, there is that group that might need a concession, or some type of leadership involvement. So whatever happens, just to talk briefly about what happens right after, and maybe what could have happened before. Right after, I'll double down on Miles saying, clarity and consistency of communication. Even if there's nothing to communicate, if you said, I'm going to get back to you tomorrow with an update, and there's no update, get back to them tomorrow with the fact that you don't have an update. And don't mince words. Clarity is kindness. I think that's Brene Brown. But it does, you're not, happiness and go-luckiness, filling it with things that they might want to hear is not kind to your relationship, or to that person, or to yourself, even though it might sort of smooth out the initial jagged edges. Often leaders are concerned with getting involved because it's hard to disengage. So in the aftermath of this, often what's very useful is, if they're asking your leader a question and you're on the CC, you reply. Get them back used to hearing things back from you. And this over time will help a leader who needs to engage to then be able to disengage properly. What could have happened before? Ideally, you can feel that coming. Very often you can feel this event coming. And a heads up saying, hey, I think this might escalate soon. Right. And this puts you on the balls of your feet instead of the back of them. And it's, you can strategize, you can figure out exactly what will happen in that case. Offering it also before you get there, depending on the size of the relationship, if this is an enterprise client, obviously it's something you might be able to say, look, I think that we might need some assistance here to get things cleared up. The only thing I would add to that before I stop talking is management layers. This is a great spot if you're big enough, having management layers, right? CSMs, senior CSMs, team leads. Every layer you can put in there is very helpful in managing this type of escalation, because you can handle it in more than one way. One of the biggest traps and things I would caution leadership to avoid under these circumstances is to be engaged and then reverse what the CSM has been asked to toe the line on that got us to the no, or can I talk to your manager? Sometimes it happens, sometimes a concession is made, but I often find sometimes that when it gets to this level, a leader will too often make that concession that the CSM was told not to, or said this is not how we do it anymore. What this does is undermines things in a couple of circumstances. It undermines the CSM's authority and ability and trustability with the client, and then of course morale. Morale is, it happens sometimes, but too much, it's a real morale killer. To be asked to have these really hard conversations with clients, they escalate, and then it's reversed. So those are my thoughts generally on this type of topic.
Matt, I want to ask you something, because it's an escalation scenario that, based on your answer, made me realize that we may have another type of escalation. How should the CSM, when the manager is having the conversation with the customer, and he is basically going or approving or saying things that the CSM said no to, or so basically exactly the scenario that you advised against. I'm not a CSM, but I've heard a lot this type of scenario. When the CEO goes into a room, he's promising everything he said no previously. How can we handle it internally if those things are happening?
Yeah, I would say it's just 2 points of awareness, one from both sides of that circle. I mean, a CSM really does need to understand that that's a part of the role. This is going to happen, right? It happens once in a while, right? So like especially when a company is moving into a scale up from a startup, certain things are frowned upon, or workarounds stop being a positive thing and start being debt that you're adding. No more of this, no more of that. And so I think it's just awareness that sometimes this happens, and you have to eat crow as a CSM when it does. That's the role. That's why this exists. But also just to keep in mind that when you ask a CS team or a team of CSMs to toe a line that there may be challenging conversations about, see it through. Walk the walk as well whenever you can, because the other, otherwise it's a very damaging thing to morale. Lived through that both as a CSM and as a leader. Thank you.
Let's move to a different kind of escalation. This time, it's not on the customer side. It's actually on us. We are the one dropping the ball. Maybe it was a bad config, a delay, a missed promise. Whatever it was, it hits the customer hard, and now we've got to clean it up. Matt, this is again for you. How do you handle it when the mistake is clearly on your side and trust is already shaken?
Yeah. Again, a big oh no moment, except it usually happens in the middle of an update or a team meeting. Oh no.
Yeah.
That sort of 5 or 10 second realization about the number of clients me as a CSM, I'm going to have to break this news to, and it can be from any source. Like whether it's a functionality or a release, or a setup was wrong, or CSM had the wrong impression and said yes, we do this, and then it turns out that was an error. There's also you can get there in a lot of different ways. you have to sort of take a moment to center and then get prepared for full ownership. Part of what a CSM role is to take ownership for the company, not be too transparent about, oh, well, it was this person's fault, or it was this group's fault, or this process failed. You know, I work for Link Investments Management. Link screwed up. We did, right? We, not I, not them, not this part. You know, full ownership as the company, because you're the face. It's important to predetermine and get your sweater thread pulling going on. It's like, okay, here's the problem. Through the lens of my administrator at this company, what does this mean for them? What's that attached to? Where is this going to impact them specifically? Really understand that depth. You know, think about the questions that you would have if you were them about what you're about to tell them. Take 10 minutes, take a half an hour to do that. You know, it might seem like the clock is ticking, but if you do that, you're going to have a much more effective conversation. When it comes time to that conversation, I always tell teams of mine that of all the kinds of news that you can give someone, bad news is not the worst. It's no news, or it's incorrect news, right? Everyone loves good news. Bad news, if it's true and well delivered, can be trust forming, because they trust you. What comes out of your mouth is the truth. They might not like what they're hearing, but if you can show them that it's never opaque and it's not gussied up, to Miles' earlier points too, truth is trust forming, and it can be. So get in there, tell them exactly what's going on. Don't be hopeful to yourself about, oh yeah, I think we can get this solved in a couple of days. Base it on fact, base it on what's going on. If you don't know, you don't know. Post, like, you know, after the Band-Aid is ripped, you know, it's an opportunity to have a bad news conversation. So don't phased disclosure it. If you've got bad news to talk about it all. If they don't raise some things that you know they should be raising, offer it. Show them that you know their program. Oh, and by the way, this is also going to affect XYZ of your program with us because ABC. Again, get it all in there. Show them you know the program and get it all done. Rip the Band-Aid so that you can start, you know, fresh with it. Diarize, prioritize, all the communication stuff that both myself and Miles had mentioned earlier apply. Yeah, I mean, I guess the only other thing I would say is these are the conversations that CSMs need to save for a rainy day for. It's why we need to make good conversations great every time. Banking this relationship currency, you know, that we all hold as CSMs, because you are going to need to spend it, and it's often not going to be your fault. You are the face of the company, and you need to spend it, and you're going to be broke for a while in that relationship. So, whenever you can turn good into great, that's how you bank this, so that these aren't circumstances that break the relationship irreparably.
And after the fire is out, how do you handle the internal side? What happens internally? Let's say that you manage to mitigate the external side of things. What happens internally?
Yeah, so it's one of the easiest things to say and the hardest things to do is solve for the client first, solve for us second.
Okay.
That's easy to say. And very often under high pressure, large workload, you know, a few fires always burning, solve for the client happens, and then we don't solve for us second. They're both just as important as each other. They're halves of a whole. So making sure that there's that retro, making sure that everyone does sit down and the risk is talked about in numbers, where it broke down is identified, written up, what's going to happen next. It's an expensive meeting usually because there's a few leaders from different groups and departments, and the schedules are hard to line up, especially in really busy sort of scale up kind of circumstances. But without that meeting, you're missing half of what the whole needs to be. So solve for yourself second isn't second place. It's just the second half, I guess I would say.
Do you usually, how do you, because it happens to screw up things in front of the customer, and that's a reality, but it all depends on the type of impact, I would say. There are minor things and there are major things. My question is, you mentioned the retrospective and basically a post-mortem after it happened. Do you do it for all the types of mistakes, let's call them mistakes, that you did, or do you prioritize depending on? Some of them with lower impact, it's just an apology and admission. Some of them, how do you prioritize between?
Yeah, and you're right. There's certain levels, you know, you can prioritize by impact, or also about if it was just a mistake that was made by someone or a group to a note, like within a known process, and something shouldn't have happened the way it did, then there's less to interrogate in a retrospective or a postmortem. You know, like a lot of it is just, yep, that fell through the crack. The crack shouldn't be there. We're gonna make sure that doesn't happen as much. But when something is either extremely business impactful or is a part of a trend of similar things, or is not necessarily a failure in a documented understanding about how things should have gone, but is a failure that's not a part of things, I think that's where the important retrospectives should happen.
Okay, now let's talk about the kind of escalations that feels less like a fire and more like a slow leak. Let's imagine that the issue was fixed and everyone moved on, but then it comes back. And maybe it's not even the second time, it's the third or the fourth. And you know what? The customer is tired, you are tired, and now it's not just about the issue, it's about the fact that it keeps coming back. Myers, how do you deal with repeat issues like this?
Well, first of all, too often we stop when we've stopped the bleeding without, you know, we provide a workaround, but we don't solve the root cause problem. So just because the customer's not bleeding anymore doesn't mean it's any less urgent. It means they're going to live through it. You can't stop. And sometimes it was because we just didn't fully understand the problem. We need to dig deeper. We need to see it, reproduce it, and think it through. Too often, especially longer ago in my past, I've had people look at a problem and say, well, you know, I don't get it. Well, if you're an engineer, look in the code, try and think through what could be causing this. You know, the customer keeps having this problem. Well, they shouldn't. Yeah, they shouldn't. We all agree they shouldn't. But you know, it's this. I have a science analogy where, you know, science keeps evolving. You've got a theory and it works for a while, but then new information comes up and you adapt your theory. It's the same. It's like during that crisis we were talking about earlier, where you keep giving updates that this approach proved to be a dead end. We've got this other approach. If the customer keeps having the same problem, you've got to dig deeper. You can't just solve what's on the surface. You have to understand what's happening behind the scenes there.
How do you usually dig deeper? Because you mentioned that. What do you do exactly when you dig? What's the process?
Well, there's the support 101, the reproduction, the logs, and all that. But you've got to be able to think, if it's not A, it must be B, right? Long ago, I was supporting a product that was a full screen thing long before Windows. And one of my customers was a university, and they kept getting weird data in their full screen application. And we couldn't figure it out. I said to my TSC who was working for me, I said, take a book and drop it on your keyboard, right? You're a student, you're in a library, think it through. They dropped the book on the keyboard and they reproduced the problem. Now we understand it. As Matt was alluding to earlier, you've got to have that customer empathy. Think through the lens of the user, not through the lens of the people who developed the product. You keep hearing, well, it's working as designed. Well, maybe it wasn't designed for this use case, right? So think like the customer. Matt went there several times. That's absolutely true.
How do you keep the customers calm when they feel like it's deja vu?
I hate sounding redundant here, but it's still the communication. It's telling them the plan. This is the theory we're working on. This is what we're doing. It's not enough to say, yeah, whatever. I mean, they get that. You can, that's other. So you can't lie to them. You lose trust, and then you get nothing left. But excuse me. It's telling them the reproduction. It's digging deeper. In some cases, I had a customer recently who had this really weird data synchronization problem. And because I was saying earlier, I had a high-level team that had the trust with engineering. We actually got engineering on a series of calls with the customer. And through the investigation, what we learned is the data wasn't syncing because of this really interesting bug in our product. We were selecting a whole bunch of data, taking the first 1,000 records and syncing them, going back, taking a whole bunch of data, taking the second 1,000 records and syncing them. That sounds really good until you realize the data wasn't coming in the same order. We weren't sorting it, and that's how we were losing records on the sync. But you've got to look at it deeper. It's not, well, we took 1,000, we took 1,000, can't understand why it's not working. Think it through. Which 1,000 are we getting? We're not getting that same 1,000. And it took several days of my having engineers on the call for them to realize this, that it is our problem, it is a bug, and you have to think through what is really happening behind the scenes. And when the customer saw this thing happening, they love us. We got them through this really weird problem that only they were having because of just the massive amount of data they were trying to sync on a daily basis.
I think I really like the comments and the interaction on the chat, and I'm gonna mention it. Thank you, Corey, for your contribution. He is mentioning some problems are unsolvable though, if it stems from somewhere outside internal control. In that case, you must have a workaround documented and shared as best as you can. Additionally, some problems are technically solvable by the engineering team, but they may be highly time-consuming and low impact that it's not worth steering away from the more impactful roadmap vision. What's your take on this, Miles? Do you agree, disagree?
A little of both, I have to admit. Very, very good question. Okay. Thank you for asking it. So a while ago, I wrote an article on escalations, and I have this priority, severity, frequency, age algorithm that you can apply. So yes, this may be a huge problem. It's going to take a lot of time. You've got to think through how many customers is it impacting, and what's the true net impact doing to this customer. It may be that they're trying to do something which is unique to their environment, and maybe there's another way of doing it. Yes, doing it this way is never going to work, and we can't invest the resources, but you can get the same results by doing it this other way. Or again, if it's something which you're not really intended to do, it goes back to you were talking earlier about the feature that's never going to happen. It's the hard truth, at least gets the customer past it. This isn't going to happen. You can't tow a 10,000-pound trailer with a Volkswagen. Not going to happen, right? So what are your options? Get a smaller trailer, get a bigger car, do something else, load the car instead of the trailer. You've got to give them other ways of solving the business problem. Sometimes solving the technical problem doesn't solve the business problem. I've got a silly story I like to tell. Someone says to you, does this road go to San Jose? And the answer is no. But that's not solving their problem. This road goes to San Francisco. This other road goes to San Jose. What are you trying to do? Find out what the business problem is and solve that. Because sometimes, again, if this problem can't be solved the way everyone, or the way the customer thinks it should, there's another way to solve the business problem. People don't care about the bug. They care about whatever they're trying to solve in their business operation.
Kenneth and Corey wanted, okay, Matt wants to, Matt, you raised your question. I wanna mention Kenneth and Corey wanted want the link to the article you mentioned, Miles. You can drop them in the chat or send it later on. Matt, you wanted to say something?
Yeah.
Build on what Miles was saying.
Yeah, to your point, Miles, another way that I've always thought of that, which is the same thing you're talking about, I think. It's a quote certainly not mine. I should know the gent's name, but famous marketer, the whole, people don't want a 1/4-inch drill. They want a 1/4-inch hole.
Exactly.
Right. And so that kind of thinking, like you're describing, can be a very effective sort of pair of lenses to put on as a CSM around what's the problem they're trying to solve, right? Well, they want a green button here. Okay, where they're trying to get to. Why do they want to be there? Is there another way sort of around it? So just, yeah, 2 hands raised to that point. It's a great pair of glasses to have in your back pocket as a CSM to kind of look at a problem through in a new way when it feels stuck in that sense.
We also have it on the marketing side. We call it try to find out the job that the customer is trying to solve. And usually this applies to many different areas. You try to understand that to make sure, okay, how can you pitch the product? And I think on the CS and on the CSM side, on the support side, you are trying to understand what's the job they are trying to solve in order to see how you can help them move forward. In the end, it's just a matter of trying to understand why are they there in that particular situation. What was the driver? Let's move forward with the 5th scenario that we have prepared. Some escalations are crystal clear. Something is broken and the customer just want a fix. They want a resolution. But in other cases, it's not so clear. What's clear is that the customer is upset, but their messages are all over the place. They are frustrated, maybe even angry, but they can't tell you exactly what they want. So now you are trying to solve a problem you don't fully understand while also keeping things calm. And I think this relates very well to what we just discussed, trying to understand what are they trying to solve. Matt, how you handle this kind of situation?
Sure. Yeah. And so, I mean, I was recently through this something like this a couple of times. I've been with Link Investment Management now for just about 4 months. And so, you know, a big part of ramping up in any company, especially heading up a fledgling CS musculature, is getting to know people that are happy with us, getting to know people that aren't, you know, just understanding that whole thing. And so I did spend a few conversations very much of this nature, where there was a general sense of frustration. And the challenge is that there were so many threads to that frustration that, you know, it was hard to pick apart or understand exactly what were the big contributors. So absolutely, this is fresh in my mind. Often sort of outside my particular experience that I mentioned, often these things I find tend to happen after periods of quote calm, unquote. You know, it's a middle-size client. You know, obviously, if they were enterprise or something like that, you know, there would be executive relationships, and it'd be very unusual to have a whole bunch of things come out at once that are frustrating, that are a challenge to determine exactly the nature of it. So most often I find this is sort of like the middle of the client group. They've been chugging along. Other parts have needed focus for a little while. It's after a period of calm, then something like this often occurs. Also, this can happen a few months after, like an admin change or a change in your main contact that maybe wasn't held in hand well enough. But we'll get to that in a sec. Let go of the rope is probably sort of what you need to do with this. Take a moment for yourself, which I've said a few times before. Understand that this is now going to be a process. It's not to be rushed. This is like book some time in your calendar for this, because the first thing to do is to question them relentlessly. When they stop talking, and what else? And what else? Michael Bumgay-Stanier, one of the 7 questions in his amazing coaching book. And what else? If they bring something else new, interrogate that, understand exactly what they mean. They stop talking, and what else? Not, is there anything else? Not, did you have anything else you wanted to bring up? Not hopeful closures. Not, oh God, please let this be the end phrasing. And what else? More, until you hear the words, that's it.
Okay.
Your job's not done until you hear the word, that's it. Next job, here's what I heard from you. It's really useful to have like a note taker, like an AI note taker for these kind of calls, especially, you know, like a Fathom or an Otter, someone who's doing this for you for afterwards. But here's what I heard from you. Is that correct? Yes, that's correct. Or no, that's not correct. Okay, what about that wasn't correct? Like ruthless, top to bottom understanding. Prioritization. What are the 3 things on this list that are the most important to you that we address right away? What's the business impact of these? Why are they the most important? Great. We're going to have touch bases regularly, and we're going to use this prioritization as a sheet. We're going to start right here, 1, 2, and 3. Every time we get together, I will update you on where we're at with these 3, which ones we cannot do, which ones are outside of what we're able to do. I'll tell you why. And we're going to reprioritize. As new things come up, where does it fit? 1 to 10, 1 to 20 kind of thing. It's a process that will save you and provide clarity, you know, through the wrestling of cats. That's probably enough yammer. I do have something a concept that I'd like to bring up that I think is related to this, but it's probably a good spot to stop for questions or other thoughts.
There are not on this, no questions on this, on this topic, so you can.
Sure, I'll continue.
Yeah.
So I'm about to amaze everyone with a well thought through, highly designed visual presentation. Excuse me. We are going to talk about, and this is all related, I promise, right? Before I share, I will say this is related to where is all this coming from? How has this happened? Because they don't even know under this circumstance how to be clear about their frustration. It's usually jumbled up within a bunch of different things, a bunch of different threads, and it tends to come out of left field when it does. So this is what I think about and what I talk to my teams about when we're doing this. Can everyone see my screen? Yeah.
It's loading. It's loading.
Okay.
Now it's
so laser pointer. So steady state. Let me talk a little bit about this. So there we have our happy CS team, right? This isn't meant to be a person. It's meant to be a team. They're holding a ball, and the ball is a client customer. And please give me a little bit of bandwidth on this. I will get to my point. We have on this side the best relationship ever. On this side, crisis or churn, and the teeter-totter here or the seesaw is a relationship dynamic. What I'm trying to show with this image is that when you are over here, like this guy is, when you drop balls, what happens, right? You drop a ball, but the relationship dynamic is such that they're easy to pick up. They kind of roll back to you. No problem, right? Like this is a good thing. Every time you drop one of these balls, though, you get closer to the center, right? It's so this CS team is kind of like in that middle. What people think, excuse me, sorry, just navigating my technology. The perceived crisis point, generally, which I'll argue is incorrect. The perceived crisis point is over here, right? Crisis or churn. We've dropped it. Everything's over. They've asked to flip. They're going to leave us, and I had to put in this sad face myself. AI didn't want to put a face in, so apologies. This is, in my mind, and something I try to instill in the teams, the crisis point is not the churn point. The crisis point is a little spot right here where tiny little things that have always been easy to solve, that always kind of roll back, something very minor, something very small can happen, and the nature of the relationship will change. The weight shifts, and all of a sudden, drop balls roll away from you. Things are harder to manage. And so what I'm showing up all this for is because this is where these kind of conversations can happen, right here. When the nature of the relationship changes, well, and this is a problem, and that, and you know, I'm frustrated with this. You know, maybe you thought that they were done, or you thought that they were addressed, or they're bringing things up from 2 months ago. You know, I thought it was solved. This is the crisis because the nature changes, and it's very hard to manage the challenges that happen between here and here. Churn is still, of course, at the end. The other thing I want to illustrate or point out here is that by the time you are here, right, look at the whole length that you would need to do in order to flip this relationship back. You know, it's almost impossible. This effort is usually way too late, and it's, you know, after someone says we're done. I've been only very rarely, in my experience, been involved in conversations that actually come out saving that. If we think about crisis point here, small things can change things back. Efforts, concerted efforts by the company to do it, we can get back there. So I just like to think of all of this sort of in my head in this way in relation to this topic, because when someone calls up and they don't know what they're talking about, but there's general frustration and it's hard to determine, this is almost always what has happened, and it should be treated like a 5-alarm fire. For the reasons I've been through. So I hope that wasn't too cheesy, but
no, it wasn't. And actually, you have a question, Matt. Corey is asking, how do you know when you are at this critical stage?
It's a good question, and I would certainly love to hear from the group or Miles or anyone like on thoughts about how they've seen. You know, I don't have a magic bullet for that. It is these changes, right? So like in this circumstance, everything's been going well, no problem. Yeah, we've dropped a few balls, but things are fine. And now we haven't talked in a while, and they're here. What I can tell is they're agitated, but there's no clarity around what it's about. Something's changed for this administrator about you, about their goals in their company, and their idea about how you fit into them achieving it. And so that is the critical thing for me about how you can tell if it's here. What else? Like, does anyone else have?
Maya, do you have a different view?
Well, yeah, this kind of segues into what your next planned question is about, and that's identifying the issue. So I'll wait for that discussion rather than interrupting that.
Okay, then, well, I'll introduce the last scenario that we had prepared.
Sure.
When the customer hasn't said anything yet, and there's no big complaint or no angry emails, no open tickets, but somehow something feels off. And they've gone quiet, and the usage dropped, engagement isn't what it used to be. And your gut says, if we don't step in now, this is going to blow up later. So how do we handle this type of conversation?
So again, I'm on the support side, not the success side. So I don't necessarily see a decrease in usage up front, but as all of us have said so far today, that relationship between success, support, engineering, and others is critical. I saw a clip of a Custify webinar, Grant Dutton talking about unified customer experience there. And we all have different pieces of knowledge. So I might notice that a formerly active support customer, their case frequency or behavior on those cases has changed. There's aging, there's non-responsiveness, there's repeat tickets, where I'm getting pings from the field team, whether it's success or accounts or whatever. And we all have these different pieces. The CSM is sensing that he's not getting the warm welcome when he walks in. I'm sensing that when they call support, they're no longer collaborative. There's hints along the way. And you're absolutely right, Matt, that once you pass that fulcrum, it becomes a very difficult recovery. You still have that moment at the top there, if you should ever get there. But once you're at the far end, it's a long climb back if you can do it at all. But if I'm aware of something, I'll proactively reach out by phone if possible, otherwise by email. Introduce myself if we don't already have a relationship, explain what I'm observing, and as Matt said, to the other thing, own it. Right? It's not, well, engineering this, well, support that, well, if sales this other thing. It's, hey, I'm the face of the company right now. I'm sensing you guys have an issue. Let's get in front of it. Let's fix it. And it's hard, in support to have that opportunity to be that proactive, but those indicators are there. I've got data which shows the reduced cases or the increased lag times or whatever, and that's just data. But you have to use your intuition to understand and interpret that data. What is this report telling me? And it's not just telling me, XYZ company isn't opening as many cases anymore. Oh, isn't that great? They must be happy. No, silence, as Matt said, silence is not necessarily a good thing, right? I'd rather reach out and say, you guys have this big project going on, and all these little incidents not incidents, but little problems that we've been resolving. Did you roll out successfully? How are things going? Or if I don't want to risk that with the customer directly, talk to success if they've got a CSM assigned.
Yeah, absolutely. And like in all my time doing this, I've hardly ever seen a customer or a client get really angry and then flip the table and quit as a part of that anger. Where almost all the time where I see this happen is we think we've solved it. They say, okay, yep, to the solution, but what they are is just tired of this happening. And they're not content. And then they're quiet for 3 or 4 months while they put out an RFP. And 4 to 6 months after this has happened, the company thinks, great, yeah, we had this big escalation with them and we totally managed to douse the fire. And they're just chilling out over there now. And then it's just like a left hook. We're leaving you. It's quiet clients scare me 10 times more than even the ones who are willing to call me up and yell. I'd much prefer that because we're speaking.
Anger is because they care, right?
Yeah, they're engaged. They're like, their success. You are risking their success.
Yeah,
I have goals here in my company, and you are screwing it up. This is a how can we get to the other side and fix it conversation. Exactly.
Now,
Quiet after that is I need a new solution.
A lot of companies I've been through have a red account process, or however you want to escalate a critical account. And that's great because that gets executive sponsors involved. It gets VPs from across organizations involved. It's a great communication tool, again, between support and success and the others. And that's how you track this. And now you've got your C-levels watching this customer too. And rather than the customer saying, I want to talk to your CEO is saying, I want to talk to this customer, and flipping the table that way. Again, the fact that you're reaching to the customer, you care, right? If you're oblivious to the customer and the customer's apathetic about you, you're already way past the fulcrum on that little pivot there.
Yeah, that's. I was going to add something similar to that to this circumstance too. So, something's fishy, but we're not sure what it is. Like that's part of what Irina you laid out. There's a sense that there's something not quite right going on at an enterprise or a higher touch kind of CSM level. You should always have a few threads going on, right? You should know a few other people. If myself as a CSM isn't comfortable just like flat out saying, I'm itchy, client administrator, I'm itchy. Why am I itchy? What's going on? If it's not that kind of relationship, then this is the right time to say, hey, Matt, you know, so-and-so, this person's boss from X company, I think it might be a good time to just check in on the general side. Like, are they getting acquired? You know, are they like, how's the business doing? Like, can you please have a check-in? Because my spidey sense is tingling. As we march more into the one-to-many side of things, or the more sort of tech touch thing, you know, like, as you mentioned, if we're lucky enough to have software to automate some of this stuff, that product usage should be flagging things. You know, in the very tech touch, it should be automating outreaches. It should be doing check-ins in that way. You know, so like across the size spectrum, you've got different ways of getting this done. But otherwise, as in this case, if it was too late and you didn't do any of that, the only thing left to do is to learn. If this was a really key client, I think money spent on third-party exit interview outputs is just gold dust. They will tell someone else what they would never tell you, even your CEO. So if it was a key partner or a big, like a whale of a client or some important client, spend that money if you have it to do it. Otherwise, figure out what happened. It's the only thing that you can benefit from at the end.
And some of these new AI tools, I've not used them, but they tell you customer sentiment in their communications, in the emails, and the cases and whatnot. So if you can get that kind of automated eyes telling you customer sentiment, you might get some of this early warning as well.
I really like the fact that we transformed the escalation, which I think they have a negative connotation into a positive thing. And I think I really like the way you explained that we can also see the full size of the glass of water. And not necessarily a fun fact, a thing that I wanna share. In a previous company that I used to work, I was super concerned about escalations, support tickets, and I always saw the negative part of things until I ran an analysis, and I realized that there was no direct correlation between the number of support tickets and churn. And that was the moment when I actually realized that churn and support tickets are not necessarily a bad thing. And with that,
Going silent from apathy. Yeah.
can you please repeat? I didn't.
When they've stopped logging the cases, they've gone silent. They've become apathetic, and that, like Matt said, they've got RFPs out at that point.
Yeah. Watching the time, I think we are going to wrap up things here, but not before saying thank you both, Matt and Miles, for being so open and honest today. You didn't just talk theory, you gave real examples and real lessons. And I know that's exactly what people came here for. And for everyone watching, if you want to catch escalation like this early, take a look at Castify. We help CS teams stay ahead of risk, spot early signals, and act before things turn into fire drills. If that's something you are struggling with, we'd love to help. We'll send the recording shortly, and we hope to see you at the next Castify webinar in September. More on that soon. Until then, take care and enjoy your summer.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for hosting. Thank you for attending. Have a great day.
Have an awesome day. Thank you. Bye all.